Dr. Ethan Miller stepped onto the Zevrix medical vessel, his boots clanging against the metallic floor. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something acrid, like burnt rubber, and the alien crew's panicked voices echoed down the corridors. So he said with a wry smirk, slinging his travel bag over one shoulder, "Which one of you thought it was a good idea to keep something with 6-inch fangs as a pet?" The reptilian aliens surrounding him went silent, their scaled faces an inscrutable mix of offense and anxiety. Commander Varish, the tallest of the group, his emerald scales gleaming under the harsh lights, stepped forward. "The Rilgorr is not a pet human," he said sharply, his forked tongue flicking out as if tasting the air. "It is a keystone predator essential to the balance of our homeworld's ecosystem. This is a conservation effort, not a hobby." "Right," Ethan replied, unbothered. "And now it's gone berserk. Must be going great so far." Varish's jaw tightened, and the other Zevrix shifted uncomfortably. It was undergoing a routine examination when it became unmanageable, the commander admitted. "Our sedatives failed, and attempts to restrain it have only provoked further aggression. It has already injured 3 of my crew. We cannot afford to lose it, but we cannot approach it without risking more casualties." Ethan adjusted the strap on his bag and gave Varish an assessing look. "Why call me? I'm a vet, not a miracle worker." "Your file indicates extensive experience with dangerous Earth fauna," Varish said. "Our analysis of your species suggests a unique aptitude for handling high-risk biological entities. You were the most logical choice." "Flattering," Ethan said, deadpan. "But if all you needed was someone too dumb to say no, you could have picked almost any human." He sighed and tilted his head. "Fine, show me the Rilgorr." The Zevrix led him through the winding corridors of the ship, the tension among the crew palpable. As they approached the containment bay, the guttural roars of the Rilgorr grew louder, reverberating through the metal walls. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Sounds cuddly." Varesh stopped in front of a reinforced viewing panel and gestured inside. "There," he said grimly. Ethan peered through the glass. The Rilgorr was a massive, wolf-like creature, its sleek black fur matted with sweat. It had 6 limbs, 4 powerful legs tipped with razor-sharp claws, and 2 smaller, clawed appendages near its chest that flexed menacingly as it thrashed against its restraints. Its eyes glowed an eerie yellow, and its jaws, lined with curved fangs, snapped at the air with bone-rattling force. The metal restraints groaned under the strain, and Ethan had no doubt the creature could shred them if it tried hard enough. "Well," he said after a long pause, "there's your problem. It's angry." Varish shot him a withering look. "We are aware, human. The question is what to do about it." Ethan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You said the sedatives didn't work. What about tranquilizers?" "Too risky," Varish replied. "Its biology metabolizes chemicals unpredictably. The dosage required to sedate it might stop its heart." Ethan nodded, then turned back to the creature. "Have you tried not freaking it out?" The Zevrix collectively blinked their nictitating membranes, a slow, deliberate gesture of confusion. "Explain," Varish said. "Look, you guys are all about dominance and control, right?" Ethan said, gesturing vaguely at the assembled crew. "But animals, any animal responds to how you approach them. You scare it, it fights back. You hurt it, it gets defensive. You've got to give it a reason to trust you." "And how?" Varish asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Do you propose we accomplish that?" Ethan opened his bag and pulled out a small pouch. "Treats," he said simply. The Zevrix stared at him, their slitted pupils narrowing. "Treats," Varish repeated flatly. "Yup. Positive reinforcement. Reward the behavior you want, ignore the behavior you don't. It works on dogs, cats, and apparently 6-limbed alien apex predators." He shook the pouch, and the contents rustled softly. Varish's tail flicked in what Ethan guessed was irritation. "You cannot be serious." "Dead serious," Ethan said. "Look, I'm not saying it'll solve everything, but it's worth a shot. Unless you've got a better idea." The commander hesitated, then gestured for Ethan to proceed. The other Zevrix exchanged nervous glances as Ethan approached the containment door. "Lower the restraints," he said without looking back. "What?" Varish snapped. "That is madness." "You want this thing alive or not?" Ethan shot back. "I can't work with it if it's freaking out in chains. Trust me." Varish grumbled something in his native tongue, but after a tense moment he gave the order. The restraints disengaged with a metallic hiss, and the Rilgorr immediately lunged toward the door, its claws screeching against the floor. The Zevrix crew recoiled, but Ethan stood his ground, holding up his hands. "Easy," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You're okay. Nobody's here to hurt you." The Rilgorr froze, its glowing eyes locking onto him. Ethan slowly pulled a treat from the pouch and tossed it toward the creature. It landed a few feet away, and the Rilgorr sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring. After a moment, it crept forward and sniffed the treat cautiously before snapping it up. "Good boy," Ethan said softly, tossing another treat. This time a little closer. The Rilgorr took it, its posture relaxing slightly. Ethan repeated the process, each treat bringing the creature closer until it finally stood just a few feet away, its massive head level with his chest. The Zevrix watched in stunned silence as Ethan knelt down and held out a treat in his open palm. The Rilgorr hesitated, then gingerly took the treat from his hand. "See," Ethan said, glancing back at the crew. "Not so scary when you know what you're doing." Varish's jaw worked silently for a moment before he managed to speak. "Your methods are highly unorthodox." "Yeah, well," Ethan said, scratching the Rilgorr behind one ear, "sometimes unorthodox works." The Rilgorr paced nervously within the enclosure, its glowing eyes darting from Ethan to the aliens clustered behind him. The creature's muscles rippled beneath its slick black fur, and its claws clicked against the reinforced flooring with every restless step. Ethan remained crouched just inside the enclosure, holding another treat in his outstretched hand. He kept his posture loose and non-threatening, the way he'd approach a nervous dog. "Come on, big guy," he said softly, glancing at the creature without staring directly into its eyes, a trick he'd learned with wolves back on Earth. "We're not so different, you and me. Both of us stuck in a cage full of people who don't understand us." Behind him, Commander Varish muttered in his native tongue, the guttural clicks and hisses betraying his irritation. One of the smaller Zevrix leaned toward the commander and whispered, though not quietly enough to escape Ethan's ears. "He's going to die. He's going to die. And then the Rilgorr will kill us all." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Ethan called over his shoulder, not bothering to turn around. The Rilgorr's ears flicked at the sound, and Ethan's attention snapped back to it. "Hey, focus on me, not them. They're noisy, I get it, but they're not the ones with the snacks." He tossed another treat, a deliberate underhand lob that landed just a few feet in front of the creature. The Rilgorr sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring with suspicion, before inching forward to investigate. It snapped up the offering with a quick jerk of its head, then returned its wary gaze to Ethan. "There you go," Ethan murmured. "See? Not so bad, huh?" The Zevrix behind him continued their hushed debate, their anxiety palpable. "This is absurd," Varish finally growled. "Explain yourself, human. What exactly are you attempting to accomplish?" Ethan straightened slightly but didn't rise from his crouch. "You ever see a stressed-out dog?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. He glanced over his shoulder, noting the commander's perplexed expression. "When an animal's scared or in pain, it lashes out. It's not personal, it's just survival instinct. You can't fight instinct with brute force. You have to work with it." Varish's tail flicked sharply, a gesture Ethan had come to recognize as frustration. "And these treats are your solution? Bizarre human nonsense." "Not nonsense," Ethan corrected. "Positive associations. Food means safety. If the Rilgorr starts to connect me with something good, it won't see me as a threat." The commander's slitted pupils narrowed. "You are gambling with your life on a theory." "Not a theory," Ethan said with a faint grin. "Just experience." He turned back to the Rilgorr, which had taken another cautious step toward him. Its massive head tilted slightly, as if trying to decipher the strange, non-threatening creature in front of it. "Isn't that right, buddy? You're just a big puppy with anger issues." "Puppy," one of the Zevrix repeated, the word dripping with incredulity. Ethan ignored them, focusing instead on the Rilgorr. He noted the way it kept shifting its weight off one of its hind legs, favoring it. A dark, matted patch of fur near the joint caught his eye, and he frowned. "You're hurt, aren't you?" he murmured, more to himself than the creature. "That's part of why you're so worked up. Explain," Varish demanded. Ethan pointed to the injured leg without taking his eyes off the Rilgorr. "It's got a wound near its hind leg. Probably happened when you captured it, or when it started thrashing around in here. Pain makes everything worse, makes it defensive, aggressive. If we don't treat it, this is just going to keep happening. The aliens recoiled at the suggestion. You would enter the enclosure, one of them hissed, their tone equal parts horror and disbelief. That is suicide. Ethan shrugged. Not if I do it right. I've got protective gear. Which will do nothing against its claws, Zevrix interrupted, his voice sharp. This is madness. Even now it tolerates you only because of your ridiculous bribes. It's not tolerating me, Ethan corrected. It's starting to trust me. There's a difference. And if you want this thing alive, we need to take care of that leg. You can't just leave it to suffer. The commander's gaze hardened. The risks are mine to take, Ethan cut in. He stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, and turned to face the aliens. Look, you called me here because you couldn't handle this on your own. So let me do my job, or don't, and keep watching it tear itself apart. Your call. Zevrix's tail lashed again, but after a tense pause he gave a curt nod. Proceed. But if you are killed, human, I will personally explain to your species why we opted not to retrieve your remains. Noted, Ethan said dryly. He pulled on a padded jacket and gloves from his bag, hardly enough to stop the Rilgorr if it decided to attack, but better than nothing. You might want to back up a little, though. Crowds make it nervous. The Zevrix reluctantly retreated to the viewing area, their wide eyes fixed on Ethan as he re-entered the enclosure. The Rilgorr watched him warily, its ears flicking back and forth. Ethan crouched again, holding another treat in his palm. Hey, big guy, he said softly. We're gonna fix you up, okay? You just keep eating these, and I'll make the bad stuff go away. He tossed the treat closer to the injured leg, forcing the Rilgorr to shift its weight slightly to reach it. As it did, Ethan moved closer inch by cautious inch, he said conversationally, glancing up at the creature's massive jaws. For an apex predator, you're basically just an oversized puppy. Well, a puppy with claws that could slice me in half. The Rilgorr's ear twitched, and Ethan couldn't help but chuckle. Yeah, you know I'm right. He knelt beside the injured leg, close enough now to see the gash clearly. It was deep but not infected, a lucky break. He pulled a small, portable medkit from his bag and opened it carefully, making sure the soft sounds didn't startle the creature. This is going to sting a little, he warned it, even though he knew it couldn't understand him. But you'll feel better after. The Rilgorr tensed as he applied an antiseptic spray, its claws flexing against the floor. Ethan immediately tossed another treat, this time directly into its mouth. The distraction worked, and the creature relaxed enough for him to continue. He worked quickly but gently, cleaning the wound and applying a pressure bandage that would hold until the Zevrix could provide more advanced care. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and let out a slow breath. There. Good as new. Well, close enough. The Rilgorr sniffed at its bandaged leg, then looked up at Ethan with something almost like curiosity. Ethan grinned and tossed another treat. See? Told you I'd make it better. Behind the glass, the Zevrix stared in stunned silence. Finally, Zevrix spoke, his voice low and grudgingly respectful. Your methods defy all logic, human. Yeah, Ethan said, standing and dusting off his hands. But they work. Ethan didn't need to be a doctor to spot the problem. The wound had gone a sickly green at the edges, with a faint, wet sheen that didn't look like anything remotely healthy. The Rilgorr had stopped pacing and now lay sprawled on its side, panting heavily. Its breath came in ragged bursts, and Ethan could see its sides heaving. Yeah, he muttered under his breath. That's not good. He turned to Commander Zevrix, who stood stiffly at the observation window, flanked by a pair of equally tense subordinates. This wound's infected. If we don't treat it ASAP, this thing's not going to make it. Zevrix's slitted pupils flicked to the injured predator, then narrowed back on Ethan. Its immune system is robust. It will recover on its own. Not with that kind of infection, it won't, Ethan shot back, straightening. He jabbed a thumb toward the Rilgorr. You see how it's breathing? That's distress. If the infection spreads, sepsis, organ failure. Game over. Trust me, I've seen it before. Zevrix's tail flicked once, an irritated snap that echoed faintly in the sterile room. And what do you propose, human? It is not as though we can simply administer your primitive earth medicine and hope for the best. Its biochemistry is vastly different from anything you are familiar with. Yeah, alien biology's complicated, Ethan said with a dismissive wave. I get it. But you've got medical supplies, right? Bandages, antiseptics, stuff like that. Naturally, Varish replied, his voice bristling with offense. Great. Then we'll start there. Ethan yanked off his gloves and stuffed them into his back pocket. Get me whatever you've got in the infirmary, antibacterial agents, wound dressings, the works. I'll figure it out. Varish's tail lashed again, this time with uncertainty, and one of his subordinates hissed softly. Our antiseptics may not be compatible with its physiology, the subordinate warned. The compounds could exacerbate the infection rather than neutralize it. Yeah, that's always a risk, Ethan admitted, resting his hands on his hips. But doing nothing is a bigger one. Unless you've got a miracle cure hiding somewhere, this is our best shot. He glanced back at the Rilgorr, which let out a low, rumbling growl as it shifted uncomfortably. Come on, he added, looking back at the commander. You wanted me here for a reason. Let me do what I do. Varish's jaw tightened, and for a moment Ethan thought the alien might refuse. But then the commander gave a sharp nod, gesturing to one of his subordinates. Retrieve the supplies, he ordered. The subordinate hesitated, then scurried off with a quick series of clicks and hisses. Ethan knelt back down beside the Rilgorr, careful to keep his movements slow and deliberate. The creature's glowing yellow eyes flickered open, fixing on him with a wary gaze. Hey, buddy, he murmured, pulling a small piece of jerky from his pocket. He held it out at arm's length, letting the scent waft toward the predator. I know you feel like crap right now, but we're going to fix you up, okay? Just hang in there. The Rilgorr let out a low, rumbling growl but didn't move away. Ethan took that as permission and inched closer, tossing the jerky to the floor a few inches from the creature's muzzle. It sniffed the treat cautiously before snapping it up with a quick flick of its jaws. Good boy, Ethan said quietly, his voice calm and steady. See? I'm on your side. The door to the observation room hissed open, and the subordinate returned, carrying an assortment of medical supplies in its clawed hands. It deposited them on a nearby table with a clatter, then backed away quickly, as though the mere presence of the Rilgorr might be contagious. Ethan stood and strode over to the table, scanning the alien items with a practiced eye. Most of it was unfamiliar, sleek, strangely shaped containers filled with iridescent liquids or powders. But a few things looked vaguely usable: a roll of what seemed to be bandage material, a pair of sterile gloves, and something that resembled a spray bottle. Okay, Ethan muttered, picking up the spray bottle and giving it a cautious sniff. It smelled faintly of something sharp and medicinal, not unlike hydrogen peroxide. This'll do. He set it aside and grabbed the roll of bandages. And these. Varish watched him with barely concealed skepticism. You cannot possibly believe you can concoct an effective treatment with such crude methods. Crude? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. This is called improvising. Humans are great at it. You'd be surprised what we can do with a little duct tape and some elbow grease. He flashed the commander a quick grin before turning back to the Rilgorr. Now let's see what I'm working with. He crouched by the predator's side again, this time slipping on the sterile gloves. The Rilgorr growled softly as he reached for its injured leg, its claws flexing against the floor. Ethan immediately pulled another treat from his pocket, tossing it closer to the creature's muzzle. Easy, he murmured. We've been over this. I'm the guy with the snacks, remember? The Rilgorr hesitated, then snapped up the treat, its growl subsiding into a low, rumbling purr. Ethan took that as his cue and gently lifted the injured leg, exposing the infected wound. The stench hit him immediately, a sharp, acrid odor that made his nose wrinkle. Yep, that's infected, he muttered. He picked up the spray bottle and gave it a quick shake. Okay, buddy, this might sting a little. But it's better than the alternative. He sprayed a fine mist over the wound, the liquid fizzing slightly as it made contact with the raw flesh. The Rilgorr let out a sharp, snarling growl, jerking its leg out of Ethan's grip. It snapped its jaws at him, narrowly missing his arm, and the Zevrix in the observation room let out a collective hiss of alarm. Whoa, 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 Ethan said quickly, holding up his hands. He tossed another treat toward the predator, but the Rilgorr ignored it, its growl deepening into a menacing rumble. Ethan, withdraw, Varish barked, his voice cutting through the tension. It will kill you. Ethan didn't move. Instead, he knelt back on his heels, keeping his hands in clear view. Hey, easy, he said softly, his tone steadied despite the adrenaline coursing through him. I know it hurts. I get it. But I'm trying to help you, okay? Just give me a chance. The Rilgorr's growl faltered slightly, its eyes flicking to the treat on the floor. Ethan stayed perfectly still, not daring to reach for it or make any sudden movements. After what felt like an eternity, the creature lowered its head and snapped up the treat, chewing slowly. "That's it," Ethan said, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Good boy." He reached for the leg again, this time moving even more slowly. The Rilgorr watched him but didn't pull away, its gaze wary but no longer hostile. Ethan resumed cleaning the wound, working quickly but carefully. As he wrapped the bandage around the leg, he spoke softly, more to himself than anyone else. "This reminds me of a rescue I did once. Big old grizzly bear, mean as hell, but only because it was in pain. Got tangled up in some barbed wire, and it was infected all to hell. Took me hours to get close enough to treat it. But once I did, she turned out to be a big softie." The Rilgorr huffed softly, almost as if it understood. Ethan smiled faintly and tied off the bandage. "There, all done." He stepped back, giving the creature some space. The Rilgorr shifted its weight experimentally, then let out a low, rumbling purr. Ethan glanced back at the observation room, where the Zevrix stared in stunned silence. "See," he said, wiping his hands on his pants. "Not so scary when you know what you're doing." The Rilgorr let out a deep, guttural rumble as Ethan stood up and dusted off his hands. It wasn't quite a growl, but something softer, almost contemplative. Ethan tilted his head, watching the creature carefully. "You're welcome," he murmured, even though he had no way of knowing if it understood gratitude or if that sound meant something completely different. Behind the reinforced glass, Commander Veresh and his crew continued to gawk in open disbelief. Their wide, slitted eyes flicked between Ethan and the surprisingly calm apex predator, as though waiting for the inevitable moment when the human's luck would run out. It didn't come. The Rilgorr stretched its injured leg gingerly, sniffed the bandages, and settled back down with a low huff, its massive body relaxing against the floor. Ethan turned to face the observation deck, crossing his arms as he leaned casually against the enclosure wall. So he said, his voice carrying just enough smugness to irritate the already flustered aliens, "Still think I'm making this up as I go." Veresh's jaw tightened, his forked tongue darting out briefly in what Ethan had come to recognize as a gesture of internal deliberation. "You have achieved unexpected results," the commander admitted reluctantly. "But your methods remain incomprehensible to us." "It's not that complicated," Ethan replied, gesturing vaguely toward the Rilgorr. "You guys think everything's a power struggle, dominance, control, manipulation. But animals aren't like that. You don't conquer them, you cooperate." The room fell silent, the weight of the word hanging in the air like a foreign concept. Veresh's tail flicked sharply, and his yellow-green eyes narrowed. "Cooperate," he echoed, as if tasting the unfamiliar term. "Is this how humans conquer predators? Through manipulation disguised as benevolence?" Ethan barked out a laugh, shaking his head. "Not manipulation, cooperation. Big difference, Commander. We don't trick them, we work with them. Build trust. Find common ground. The idea is to make them want to work with you, not force them to." One of Veresh's subordinates leaned in, clicking nervously. "You are suggesting that it is possible to forge alliances even with creatures that operate solely on instinct?" "Sure," Ethan said with an easy shrug. "Instinct doesn't mean stupidity. Animals have their own logic, their own rules. You just have to figure out what they need and meet them halfway. For the Rilgorr, it's safety, food, and a little respect. Same as most creatures, really." Veresh folded his arms, his scales catching the harsh light of the observation deck. "Respect," he repeated, his tone tinged with skepticism. "You speak of respect for a creature that would gladly disembowel you if given the chance." Ethan grinned. "That's the thing about respect, it's gotta go both ways. If I walked in there acting like I was in charge, it'd tear me apart. But I showed it, I wasn't a threat, and now look." He gestured back toward the Rilgorr, which was now gnawing contentedly on the last of the treats Ethan had given it, its body language relaxed and unthreatening. "We're practically best friends." The commander stared at Ethan like he'd just claimed he could breathe in space. "You are a most peculiar species." "That's what they tell me," Ethan said, his grin widening. Then, as if remembering something, he added, "By the way, if you're planning to start using any of this on your other conservation projects, you might want to put in a good word with my boss. I'm going to need a raise if I'm training aliens on how to be zookeepers." A ripple of confusion passed through the Zevrix crew before one of them hesitantly asked, "What is a raise?" "More money," Ethan clarified. Or, I don't know, maybe a bonus. An intergalactic vacation wouldn't hurt either. Varish let out a sharp hiss that Ethan took as an approximation of a sigh. Your fixation on material compensation is as baffling as your methods. It's a human thing, Ethan replied with a shrug. We like feeling appreciated. The Rilgorr shifted, letting out a low, almost contented rumble that vibrated through the enclosure floor. Ethan glanced back at it, his grin softening into something more genuine. See? Even the big guy gets it. Varish's slitted eyes flicked between Ethan and the Rilgorr, the gears in his mind clearly turning. Your approach is unorthodox, but I cannot deny its efficacy. Perhaps. There is merit to studying your methods further. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What, you want me to teach a master class in alien animal care? If such a thing were possible, it would be of great benefit to our efforts, Varish admitted, though the words seemed to pain him. There are many species under our protection whose behaviors continue to elude us. If your insights could be applied elsewhere. Whoa, hold up, Ethan interrupted, holding up a hand. I agreed to help with your Rilgorr problem. I didn't sign up to be your full-time animal whisperer. Nevertheless, Varish pressed, your perspective is unique among the species we have encountered. You have accomplished in mere hours what we could not achieve in weeks. Surely you see the value in sharing this knowledge. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying I've got my own gig back on Earth. You know, where the animals don't come with claws that can slice through steel. Varish inclined his head slightly, a gesture that Ethan guessed was either acknowledgement or grudging respect. Very well. But consider this, your actions here may have saved not only the Rilgorr but countless other lives. That is a legacy worth pursuing, is it not? Great, now you're laying on the guilt trip, Ethan muttered, though there was no real bite in his tone. He glanced back at the Rilgorr, which had dozed off in a corner of the enclosure, its breathing slow and steady. Fine. I'll think about it. But seriously, put in a good word for that bonus. The commander's tail flicked once more, this time with what Ethan chose to interpret as reluctant amusement. You are a most curious creature, Dr. Miller. Yeah, you've mentioned. Ethan turned back toward the enclosure, his gaze lingering on the Rilgorr. You know, I might not understand half the stuff you aliens do, but I'll give you this, you care. Even if you've got a weird way of showing it. Varish's expression softened, just slightly. We do what we must to preserve the balance of life, even when it defies our understanding. Ethan nodded. Fair enough. Just remember, sometimes life's about more than balance. It's about connection. As if on cue, the Rilgorr let out a low, rumbling sound that the Zevrix explained was a gesture of gratitude. Ethan's grin returned, warmer this time. You're welcome, big guy. When the time came to leave, Ethan found himself lingering on the ship's ramp a moment longer than necessary. The Zevrix stood in a loose semicircle behind him, their reserved nature hiding whatever emotions they might have felt. Even Varish looked less stern than usual, though Ethan doubted he'd ever get the alien to admit it. The Rilgorr padded up to the edge of its enclosure as the shuttle's bay doors began to close. Its glowing eyes fixed on Ethan one last time, and the low rumble returned, softer now but unmistakable. Ethan chuckled and tossed one final treat into the enclosure, watching as the predator snatched it up with almost lazy precision. You're welcome, he said again, this time quieter. The doors sealed shut, cutting off the view of the Rilgorr and the Zevrix crew. Ethan leaned back in his seat as the shuttle's engines roared to life, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. As the ship ascended, he couldn't help but wonder if the Zevrix would actually take his advice. Maybe they'd see humans differently now, not as conquerors, but as something else entirely. Problem solvers. Bridge builders. Or, as Ethan liked to think of it, just really good at making friends in unexpected places.